I'm going to be giving today's talk, and it's going to be about the brain. All right. So we're going to sort of learn about and talk about how the brain works. And we're going to talk specifically about a technique that scientists use to study the brain. Okay. So I'll try to pay attention to the chat as we go through, because I have a number of moments where I ask y'all questions. Okay. And I think I'm going to spotlight my view so that y'all can see me. All right. So let's go. So the title of today's talk is Mind Readers Studying Brain Activity in Humans. So I'm going to talk a bit about how scientists make these pictures that you see on the screen right now. So before that, a bit about myself. So my background, I studied in my university. I got a bachelor's degree in molecular and cellular biology from the University of Puerto Rico in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So I am originally from there. You can see my campus on the left side of the screen. It's very green, very sunny, very warm. And you can see a picture of my lab on the right side. And so you can see what model organism we worked with for the lab. We worked with rats and we studied behavior in these animals, and we also studied the brain. Now, after this, so now I became a PhD student in the neuroscience program here at Yale, and I work with the psychiatry department, and I also work with a new institute at Yale called the Wu Tsai Institute that studies cognition. Okay, so let's actually go into the material for the talk. So where I'm going to start is I'm going to talk about the human nervous system. So can anybody tell me real quick in the chat, what do you think about when you hear nervous system? What do you think about when you hear me talk about the nervous system? What does it do? What is it involved in? Okay, I see nerves, pain, spinal cord, a system of nerves. Yep, you're all giving really good suggestions. It's involved in a lot of things. The first thing that I'll talk about is how is it divided? So the first thing is that we have a peripheral nervous system, and we also have a central nervous system. The peripheral one is all the nerves that extend throughout our body and reach every part of our body, our limbs, our fingers, our toes. And then the central one is specifically our brain and our spinal cord. And so the brain is the command center of everything, and the spinal cord helps the brain communicate with those peripheral nerves that extend throughout our body. The peripheral nervous system, we can divide it again into nerves that are autonomic and nerves that are somatic. What does that mean? The autonomic ones are things we don't intentionally control, okay? You don't tell your heart to beat. You don't tell your lungs to breathe. You don't tell your stomach to begin digestion. Those things usually just happen, right? And so they are controlled by those autonomic nerves, okay? Now, the somatic nervous system is different. It's about things that we do intentionally control, okay? So we decide how we move our muscles. We decide where I'm looking at, if I'm looking to the right of the screen or to the left of the screen. We also decide the things that we touch and feel, okay? So that's part of the somatic system of the peripheral nervous system. So enough of the nervous system, of the peripheral one. Let's talk about the brain. So the brain is the command center of everything, and the brain has a number of parts that are involved in different processes. So let's talk a bit about that. So we have a frontal lobe that is really important for a bunch of stuff. For example, problem solving. So when we're trying to do really sort of complicated thinking, the frontal lobe is crucial for that. We also have a parietal lobe that is really important for sensation. So for example, if you're petting your cat or petting your pet, that's processed in sort of those sensory areas. We also have an occipital lobe that is really, really important for processing vision. So if you're sitting down, you're watching a movie, You can understand what you're seeing because it gets processed in your brain. And we also have a temporal lobe that is really, really important for speech and hearing. So there are centers in the temporal lobe that will process the auditory information of somebody talking, and they can interpret it, and so you can understand it. Now, the basic unit of function in the brain is called the neuron. So the brain is just a bunch of neurons together. So let's talk about the neuron. The neuron is sort of this weirdly shaped cell that I have on the screen here, and it has a number of important parts. First, we have the dendrites of the neuron, and these are really taking in the inputs, okay? Then we have the cell body and the axon of the neuron that are processing those inputs, okay? So once the inputs come in, they get processed by the cell body or by the axon, and eventually they reach the terminal. In the terminal, the neuron can send out information. So that's where the outputs happen, okay? So this is the structure of the neuron, and this is more or less what each part is doing. All right, so let's talk about how the neurons communicate now, okay? So just a little bit about how the neurons actually communicate with each other. Where it starts is at the dendrites. So imagine this neuron suddenly receives an input, and this input is just a chemical signal. It's a bunch of chemicals that suddenly pop up at the dendrite of the neuron. Once those chemicals pop up on the dendrite, we start an electrical impulse, okay, in the cell body of the neuron. What happens next is that electrical impulse travels down the axon. And once it reaches the terminal, that neuron can now send out a chemical signal. Okay? So just to put it all together, we take in a chemical signal, a bunch of chemicals. It starts an electrical impulse that travels through the neuron, and eventually we send out more chemicals to the next neuron in the chain. And that happens again and again and again in this sort of giant cycle. And that is how our brains, or our neurons in our brains, can communicate. So a question that might pop into your head is, well, can we see this happening? Can we see neurons function? So what do people think? Yes or no? Do you think scientists can see neurons function? Seeing a lot of yeses. That's exactly right. We have a lot of ways to see neurons function. So for example, here's a little video where we can literally see individual neurons firing one at a time, or many at a time, really. So how is this type of video made, or how do scientists make this little clip here? This is how it works. Basically, we take a model organism, say it's a mouse, and we make a window into the brain of the mouse. And then we use really fancy cameras to take these pictures, okay? So this is how we would get this image or this video on the left side. Now, I want to ask another question. We could use this approach to study humans. What do you think? Yes or no? Could I use this approach to study humans? I'm seeing yeses, I'm seeing nos, I'm seeing maybes. So we could not use this approach to study humans because whenever we work with humans, we have to make sure that we're not doing anything that's too invasive, because we have to make sure that things are safe and that we ensure the health of our participants in our studies. So we could not use this approach to study the brain of humans. That means we have to find other ways of looking at brain function. With that, I want to talk about how the brain consumes energy. And so first, I'm going to show you a pie chart of how much mass different organs in our bodies have. And then I'm going to show you how much energy they consume. So what do people think in the chat? Do you think the brain has a lot of mass, or a brain has a small amount of mass in terms of our body? A lot of mass or not a lot, small? Okay, I'm seeing small, small, some a lots. So let's see, maybe less than 50%. Yeah, if you had to ballpark the number, how much of a percentage of our mass do you think the brain makes up? Talk about mass or weight. Seeing 5%, 40, 30, 10. So let's check it out. The brain, it's in blue, is actually only 1.9% of our total body mass, which makes sense. Imagine you had a super heavy brain. You couldn't walk around. You would need these sort of super strong neck muscles to kind of keep your head up. So no, our brains don't really weigh that much, right? In comparison to how much muscle we have or how much body fat we have, etc. Now, the question then becomes, okay, do y'all think the brain uses a lot or a very small amount of energy? And what do you think that number is as a percent? I'm seeing a lot, a lot. I think I saw 20, 70, 80%, 90% of our energy, 19.999. So let's see. The brain uses about 21% of our total energy, but it only takes up 1.9% of our weight, which is crazy. So it really uses way too much energy for how much it weighs. And that's because the brain, it's always on, it's never off, right? It's always doing something. So it always needs energy, right? And so you can see that it's a disproportionate amount of energy in comparison to its mass. All right, so let's keep going. When I say energy, what I mean is nutrients, and I also mean oxygen. These two things are really, really important for the brain to work. But this need of oxygen is really what's super important for the specific technique or method that I'm going to talk about today for how scientists look at brain activity in humans. So let's talk about oxygen. How does the oxygen circulate through our bodies? Can anybody tell me in the chat? How do you think oxygen gets to every part of our body? The blood vessels. Yep, that's exactly right. We have a system of blood vessels that carries the oxygen everywhere. It's called the circulatory system. I see some people are putting that in the chat. And for those of you asking questions, we're going to go over questions at the end, so don't worry. You can ask them towards the end of the talk. So yeah, the blood system carries the oxygen. And so we have these blood cells that are essentially just carrying the oxygen around and are going in the veins, in the blood vessels. They're carrying it around. And eventually, when our cells, when our neurons or whatever cell in our body uses that oxygen, it just takes it away from the blood cell. And now the blood cell is empty. It doesn't have the oxygen anymore. It just, and so now it needs to go back and get more oxygen. So we can have blood cells that have oxygen, and we can have blood cells that don't have oxygen, okay? So let's put a few things together. Imagine that you have your neuron, the neuron's right here, and that neuron is surrounded by blood vessels. And some of the blood vessels are delivering oxygen, and some are returning the blood back so it can get more. So imagine here's our delivery blood vessel taking oxygen to the neuron. When the neuron is at rest, it doesn't really care that much. It's at rest, it's not active, it's not using the energy that much. But when the neuron activates, what do y'all think happens? What is it going to need if it's active? What is the neuron going to need? It's going to, and I see it in the chat, it's going to need oxygen. So it's going to use the oxygen. That's exactly right. So now it'll take it from the blood cells. And once it uses it, what does it have to do then? It has to return it. So it returns it. And so now that blood cells that were returned can go back and can get more oxygen. So the point here is that anywhere in the brain where we have activity, we're going to need oxygen, and the oxygen is going to come through the blood. So with that, let's talk about the scientific approach that I'm showing today. And it's called functional magnetic resonance imaging. That's a lot of words. You don't need to know that. We call it fMRI. That's the acronym that we use. Okay. So let's talk about it. Yeah, it's a lot of fancy words, but just call it fMRI. So what are the equipments or the pieces of equipment that scientists use, that I use when I do this research? So we have this MRI machine, and it's this giant machine that you can see in the picture here in the back of the picture. And typically in these study places or these research areas, you have sort of an outside area with a bunch of monitors. You have somebody that is always there running the experiments and checking the monitor, seeing if everything is okay. And now we can do a few cool things with this machine. One of the things we can do is we can project images onto the screen there and show you stuff while you're lying inside the scanner. So maybe I want to show you a picture of a fire, and I want to see what brain areas activate when you look at fire, right? And I can do that. The other thing we can do is we can give you something to respond with. So maybe I have you play a game inside the scanner. So I give you a joystick. If it's a video game and you have to move your character around, then you need a joystick. So I give you one while you're lying down in the machine. I might also give you a mouse like the one you have there on the bottom, so that you can move it around and you can click different types of button boxes. So this is the equipment. Now, how does it work? So to understand how it works, I need to talk about magnets, which might initially seem kind of like weird. Like, why are you talking about magnets? You'll see in a second. So if you remember, if you've learned anything about magnets, you know that the reason the magnets can attract or repel things is because they have a magnetic field that's invisible. We can't see it, but you can certainly feel it when you try to push two magnets together. If you could see the magnetic field, it would look a little bit like these lines here. Can people in the chat tell me what other thing has a magnetic field? Something that's really, really important for humans and other animals to be able to survive. And I'm seeing it in the chat. Perfect. Y'all have these answers ready to go. The Earth. The Earth has a magnetic field. Without it, you wouldn't be here probably. And it's huge and it surrounds the Earth. So why am I talking about magnets and magnetic fields? Because the MRI machine is a giant magnet. That's what it is. If we cut it open and we look inside, what we would see is a giant cylindrical magnet. Okay? And we're going to put the person inside that giant magnet. So knowing that it's a magnet, can anybody try and guess, how do the magnetic field lines look for this scanner? Where are the magnetic field lines going through? What place are they sort of going through? Are they going through the sides, through the middle? I see the answer there. Somebody said through the middle. And you are correct. The magnetic field lines are going straight through the middle of the cylinder, through the opening of the scanner or through the bore of the scanner, how we call it too. So yes, they're going, like somebody said just now, they're going through the person. And that's really important, because if they aren't going through the person, then it's not going to work. The magnetic field lines are going straight through the person. Okay. Now it's a giant magnet. That means that sometimes it can cause some accidents, right? A magnet attracts metals, right? So if you bring anything metal into the room, it's gonna eat it up, okay? So in this case, somebody by accident brought in a hospital bed that wasn't safe to use around the MRI machine. And so the MRI machine lifted it up the ground and attached it to itself. It's crazy. Imagine how much force it would take to do that. None of us could individually lift a hospital bed, right? That's not going to happen, but the scanner can certainly do that because it's a super powerful magnet. So yeah, whenever we do these experiments, we have to make sure that we don't have any metal on our bodies. Okay, so I'll summarize a few things here that are important, and I have said so far to go into the last piece. Number one, the brain is made up of neurons. Number two, the neurons need oxygen to function. And number three, MRI machines are giant magnets. So everybody should have these three ideas very clearly in their heads to move on to the next part. So I told you these things, but then the central question is still, how do we use MRI machines? How do we use the giant magnets to look at brain activity? And to understand this, we need to just look at 2 points. Number one, an area in the brain that is active is going to need more oxygen from the blood. So if your neurons are resting, they don't need that much blood there. So you can imagine that the blood vessels stay sort of small. They don't need to send that much blood to that area because it's resting, it's not active. But if the area suddenly becomes active, now the blood vessels need to open up and send way more blood there, okay? So an area in the brain that is active is going to need more blood. And the second piece of this is that blood cells that have oxygen versus blood cells that don't have oxygen have different magnetic properties. So these lines here are the magnetic field lines. If you look at a blood cell that has oxygen, it doesn't mess with the magnetic field. It doesn't do anything to it. But if you have a blood cell that was just used and doesn't have oxygen, it messes with the magnetic field and it distorts it, okay? So it sort of bends the magnetic field around it, okay? That means that I can use a magnet to detect where in the brain am I seeing this distortion, where in the brain have I just used up oxygen, and now I can make these really cool pictures. Where in the brain do I see a use of blood? And this is called a blood oxygen level dependent signal, which is a lot of words again, a bold signal. And that's it. That's all these pictures are. Where in the brain am I using blood? And now I'll quickly go over some examples of stuff that people have done so that we can do our activity and come back to answer questions. So here's one study where they showed people pictures of faces, pictures of places like houses or this sort of canyon or mountain, and also scrambled pictures that are completely nonsense. And the question they asked is, do I find any areas in the brain that activate when we look at faces? And they found some. All these areas here activated when they looked at faces, right? And that's how these studies work. Here's another one. This study was looking at how we perceive taste, right? When we eat things. So they did two things. They showed people pictures of food and different types of food, sweet foods, salty foods, sour foods, and also objects. And so their study was just showing people these pictures through time, and they showed them a bunch of them. And now they can see what brain area activates when you think of sweet things or salty things. And I'm sorry if I'm making anybody hungry, but that's what they did in the study. The other thing they did was not use pictures, use actual taste solutions. So they had this really weird contraption that they kind of hooked up to the person's mouth, and then they could give them different things. So they gave them salty solution. So it was just salt that they mixed with water. They gave them a sour solution, which was just citric acid, which is what lemons, oranges, and other citrus fruits have. And they gave them a sweet solution that was just sugar in water. And so now they can ask the question, what brain area activates when you taste something sweet or something sour or something salty? Okay? And that's how they did their study. So basically, this is how we do these experiments. And really, the sky's the limit. You can do anything in these machines that you can think of. You just have to be very clever and come up with an interesting question, an interesting experimental design. But you can do it. All right. So with that, we are going to try and do an activity. And we're going to do it, for those of you who might have seen Exploring Science before, you might be used to doing these in breakout rooms. We're going to do them in the main room right now, but please follow along with the activity if you want to participate. So this activity, we're going to learn about brain processing from fMRI, okay? And we are going to do it using an interesting website that you can use. So we're going to use a website that summarizes results from a lot of these studies to find what brain areas are involved in different processes, okay? And so the instructions are, we're going to go into this website and we're going to find the brain region associated to fear, the brain region associated to memory, and then let everybody pick some other topic that they're interested in, and they can search it and see if anything comes up. Now remember, whether or not your option appears depends on how many studies have people done looking at that topic. And then we're going to share and sort of compare what people found. So I will copy the link for the website into the chat, and then I'll sort of go through it myself and kind of show everybody what it looks like. Okay. All right, so can people see the website on my computer? Yes or no? Not the slides, the website. Great, great, great. I see a lot of yeses. Perfect. So here's what I want everybody to do. This is what comes up when you open the website. All you need to do is click on meta-analyses, and then you click on terms. And in this search bar, you can type in what we talked about. I want you to type in fear first, then memory, and then you can explore and do whatever you want. So for example, if I type in something else, if I type in face, I see if it comes up. I can now click on face, and this is what I'm going to see. I'm going to see this little brain scan here, and I can click around in it, and then I can find what areas have high activity for face. Once I'm on the area, I can click what's here, and then I can see it'll load again. And if I click on associations, I can see what it's called. So for example, here is the name of the area, fusiform gyrus. All right, so I went through it right there, but I'm going to put the link now in the chat. I see some people kind of got ahead of me, so that everybody can go in. Okay. So I'm still going to keep it up. I'm going to keep showing you guys what the steps are. You can follow along with me if you want. You open the website, you click meta-analysis, you click terms, and then you type in this search bar whatever you want, but please start by typing the examples. So type fear into the search bar. Okay, so I'm going to let people kind of get to this point. Have people been able to get to this search bar and type in fear? People got into the search bar. Yes, no, need more time. Okay, I see a lot of yeses. Great. Then I'm going to do fear now. So what area? For those of you who looked up fear, let's see here. I'm going to look it up myself. Here's fear. Then we can click around here and we can find what area has a lot of activity. Oh, I think I found it here. And then you click what's here. Let's click what's here. Let's see. It'll load in a second. And now I can go into associations and I can see what it is. So what brain region people have gotten? I see some people have temporal lobe. Some people have amygdala. Some people, what else do you got? Has anybody gotten something different? Feel free to type into the chat cerebellum, amygdala, temporal lobe, amygdala. Okay, let's see what it is. Let's see what the answer is. So the top result for this area that has a lot of fear associated activity was the amygdala. And that was the correct response there. So the amygdala is really important for fear. And I'm going to talk about it a bit in a second. Let's do the second one. Let's do memory. So we can go back to the main page. You can open the link again, or you can click here to open up the main page again. And now we're going to go again to terms, and we're going to type in memory. And we're going to click on memory. Here's memory. Is anybody able to search memory? Yes or no? I did it all wrong before. It's all good. You can follow along now. We can go to the main page. We can click on meta-analyses, terms, memory, and click memory. And I'm starting to see people writing down the brain region in the chat. If we search memory, we get this huge map of activity. We can click through it to try and find anywhere that has a lot, very bright area. And we can find this area here. Seems pretty bright. Once we found it, we can click what's here. Let's see what's here. And now we search that location and we look at associations. And the first thing that pops up is hippocampus. People get that location? Yeah, I see a lot of hippocampuses there. Yep. Did anybody find something different? Anybody that might have found something different? I see parietal. All right, so if you clicked on the area with the brightest signal in the page before, you would have gotten this result and you would have seen the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is a very, very important area for memory. I'm going to talk about it more in a second. So now what I want people to do is go back again and search something else, whatever you're interested in learning about, okay? So go back to terms and forget about fear or memory. Try to search something else. If it doesn't come up, it's because people haven't done those studies. So what are people searching, and have you found results? What do people try to search? Money? Angry? I like angry. I feel like angry would work. Taste? Happy? Muscle? Let's look up happy. I like that one. So if you look up happy, it comes up. Let's click happy. And let's see what, okay, so we get this map. Let's try to find what area has a lot of signal of activity. Let's see what that area is. What's here? And we're looking at happy, because somebody said it in the chat. And let's see. Oh, look at that, the amygdala. So the amygdala isn't just about fear, it's about different emotions. That's why it's coming up with happy too. And I think we might have time for one more before we go into questions, and then we can wrap up. Anybody give me something else that they tried to look for? Language, music. Oh, music should be fun. Music? Okay, let's look at music. Music. Great. So music pops up, and we click on music, and let's see what we get. Okay, we get this map. Let's click around. Let's find stuff. And I think we would find this area. It has a lot of activity. So now let's click what's here. What is here? Okay, and once I did that, let's see association. Auditory cortex. Makes sense. The part of the brain that deals with processing auditory information is associated to music, right? But yeah, that's how the website works. It's a pretty cool website. You can keep looking at it in your spare time if you want to try to find more stuff, more areas. Somebody said do cheese. I don't think cheese is gonna pop up, honestly. Like, I don't think many people have done studies on cheese. See, it's not popping up. You can keep trying a bunch of stuff, see if you get results. You might not. That just means people haven't done your study yet. You can do the study to find where the brain processes hamburgers or cheese. Okay, so I want to wrap up real quickly and answer some questions for a bit. So what about people can sort of put in some questions into the chat, and maybe we can have we can sort of read some of those.
So actually, we've been keeping track of some of the questions.
Cool.
So cool. One of the questions is the brain necessary for the heart, or the heart necessary for the brain?
Is the brain necessary for the heart, or the heart necessary for the brain? Y'all, that's a really sort of philosophical question. Let me think about that one. So I would say, yikes, it's sort of both, right? Without the heart, the brain would not be able to get blood, to get oxygen. But without the brain and the peripheral nervous system controlling your heart rate, the sort of closing of the heart muscles and stuff like that, your heart wouldn't beat and wouldn't function. So it's sort of, I would think of it as sort of a reciprocal relationship. They need each other. It's not one or the other. They need both. But that was a great question.
Another question is, why is the mouse used as a model organism?
That's a great question. Why do we use mice? So a lot of neuroscience research uses mice and also rats, which are both rodents. And the reason is because and I see it in the chat. I see some people putting it in there. Mice, rats, they're mammals. We are also mammals. So they have pretty similar brains. Not the same at all. They're very different, of course, but they're close enough to where we can do a lot of these studies. And a lot of the time, the results do translate over to humans. Sometimes they don't. And when they don't, that just tells us that we need to look at another model organism to study that question. Some people use primates too. We can use different model organisms depending on the question. But that was a great question.
Another person would like to know if the electrical current in a neuron could be fatal.
Could the electrical current in the neuron be fatal? So I think there's a few ways to answer that question. It's not that much current to where you would think, oh, like it could be fatal, but there are certain conditions that are characterized by sort of non-controlled firing of neurons. So for example, one thing that I can think about is epilepsy. So, and when somebody has an epileptic seizure, that just means that some part of their brain fired in a non-controlled fashion, and that extended throughout other areas of the brain. So if we have uncontrolled firing of neurons, it could be a problem. So we do need to sort of control those electrical impulses. But that was a great question.
Is the blood in veins without oxygen actually blue?
Is what? Sorry?
Is blood in veins without oxygen actually blue?
It's actually no. No, it's not. That what you'll find, and I think you'll see this in your textbooks and throughout your studies in high school and college. There's people that dedicate, and their jobs are to draw these images, and their job is to draw these sort of medical images and to illustrate to students so that they can learn things. And a lot of the time, those drawings aren't necessarily going to be exactly how things look or exactly how things work, but the point is to make it simple and to help us learn these things, okay? But yeah.
Do different parts of the brain react to different flavors?
Do different parts of the brain react to different flavors? I'm not exactly sure, and I know you're referring to the results of the study. I'll bring it up here. I'm not exactly sure. I do know that generally you're gonna have a certain area that maybe is really, really important for taste, just like there's a certain area that's important for vision. And maybe there are some differences in what neurons activate when something is sweet and salt versus salty, but it's not going to be this whole other part of the brain super far away that is processing sweetness versus saltiness. They're going to be in sort of a similar area, but they might involve different groups of neurons within that area.
Why is it difficult to image a human brain directly?
Why is it difficult to image a human brain directly? Well, part of it is we need to ensure the safety and the health of the participants that take part in these studies. So we restrict our procedures to things that are non-invasive. So we could not do this technique in a human because we could not sort of get a window into their brain. So we have to rely on techniques and approaches that are completely non-invasive. And the one that I talked about today, fMRI, is not invasive. It's completely safe. And And so anybody could do it. So even here at Yale, you have studies in different groups of people, in elderly people, in adults, in teenagers, in kids, because it's completely safe, right? And so, you know, safety is the main priority of research scientists when it comes to this type of work.
Why is the brain shaped as it is? Why does it have the shape and the size that it has for humans?
Right. Why is the brain shaped the way it is? Why does it have that size? That is also a very philosophical question, but I love it. It has to do with evolution. So, you know, if you look at different animals, you can probably tell that they have different brains. And it's not just the size, the shape of the brains is different. Also, the structure of the brains are different. So our human brain looks like this, and it has these lobes and these areas. But how is it different in different animals? It depends on evolution, right? It depends on what were sort of the evolutionary pressures on that species, and what did it have to do to its brain to adapt to those pressures, right? So it's going to vary super widely. But this is the case for humans, and that means that human brains are more similar to primates, for example. They're more similar to also to mammals than they are to reptiles or fish or some other animal in some other category. But that was a great question.
Are autonomic nerves connecting to the heart completely uncontrollable?
Are they completely uncontrollable? I am not sure. I don't want to talk in absolutes, but no, you know, you can't stop those nerves from functioning, right? These are things that happen, and that happen automatically, right? So they are autonomic nerves. You can't control them, because of course you need your heart to function. So you need it to keep beating. So it's just gonna always do that. And there are a lot of other things that are in this autonomic branch, right? Your stomach, your digestion. And the interesting thing about that, right? Our stomachs aren't always digesting, right? It's not like it's always on like the heart. Our stomachs digest when we eat food. So first you need to eat the food. Your brain, your gut notices that you just ate something, and it tells the stomach to digest, right? So it's an automatic process, but it doesn't just happen always. It happens specifically when you eat something.
All right. One last question that we've written down. What is the maximum number of neuronal activations per second?
Maximum number of neuronal activations per second. Yikes, that's a big, I really don't know, but now I'm interested. Now I kind of want to see if I can find the sort of Google the response of neuronal. So here's the thing, right? We have a lot of neurons in our brains, a ridiculous amount of neurons. And a lot of the time, a lot of them are active and they're just firing. But each individual neuron has a particular rate of firing when it is active. So it's only going to fire so fast. And that can sort of range. It's not a specific number, but for example, it could go anywhere from like once a second to 200 times a second. It's a range, and it's going to depend on what type of neuron, because there are different types of neurons, where in the brain, because some parts of the brain need to fire faster than others. It's not a single answer to your question, but it's a great question. All right, I think that was our last question, and we're right at the 7 p.m. mark. I hope y'all enjoyed the talk. I hope y'all continue to join us for the next session of Exploring Science, and we'll be sure to reach out next month with the information for that. Okay, so thank you.